Hi, everyone. It is the top of the hour, and we are going to go ahead and get started. My name is Erin Owens, and I'll be the moderator for this session, which is titled Critical and Agency-Centered Responses to the Proliferation of Generative AI in Libraries. Before we begin, I have a few housekeeping reminders. We do have a code of conduct that we adhere to for this conference. The link will be posted in chat in just a second. If you experience any issues related to conduct, please do contact us via email, and I will paste that email address in the chat as well. Please be sure your microphone is muted. During the Q&A session, please wait until you're invited to unmute before asking your question or making your comment. You may use the Q&A box and the chat for questions, and we're going to hold most questions until the end of the talk. Please be aware this session is being recorded and live streamed, and the recording will be shared afterwards. You can enable captions if needed by clicking on the Show Captions button at the bottom of the screen. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our speakers. Andrea Baer is an associate professor of practice in the School of Information at the University of Texas at Austin. Sarah Appedu is a PhD candidate in Information Science and Technology at Syracuse University in Syracuse, New York, and is a former academic library worker. Emily Zerrenner is Health and Human Services Librarian at Salisbury University in Salisbury, Maryland. Please join me in welcoming Andrea, Sarah, and Emily.
Thank you so much, Erin. And thank you everyone for being here today. We know you've got choices on where to be, and we're glad you decided to be here. So we're gonna jump right into it. So just to note, the second half of our title is also important for us to point to. So we're talking about alternatives to AI hype and the inevitability narrative. So yeah, if we can go forward one slide, please. All right, so during this conference, we have an opportunity to step back from our everyday routines and reflect on librarians and library workers' evolving perspectives on AI technologies, and also to think about shifting views about AI in the country and in higher education. Next slide. So we're going to watch a couple minutes of video clips from some college graduation speeches in the US earlier this summer. Some of you may have seen these before. So yeah, we will view a couple of those.
The rise of artificial intelligence is the next industrial revolution. What happened? Okay, I struck a chord. May I finish? Only a few years ago, AI was not a factor in our lives. Okay, all right. Okay, we've got a bipolar topic here, I see. Okay, and now AI capabilities are in the palm of our hands. And oh, I love it. Passion, let's go. Okay.
Streaming rewrote the economics. Social media rewrote the discovery model. AI is rewriting production as we sit here. I know it. Deal with it. Like I said, it's a tool. Hey, like I said, you can hear me now or you can pay me later. Hey, then do something about it, okay? It's a tool. Make it work for you.
Support journalism you trust.
Andrea, you're muted.
Thank you. Sorry. All right. So many of you have seen some of those probably before. You might have been disappointed with students' reactions, or you might have been delighted. regardless of your view, it's clear people have strong feelings about AI technologies and what roles they do or should play in society, in work, in education, and in libraries. It's also clear that feelings and perspectives on AI are far from stagnant. Over the course of the last year, critiques of the speed and degree of AI adoption in various sectors has grown, as we can see from those graduation speeches. And more people are questioning hyped rhetoric about AI. We're going to talk about what hype is in a moment. And they're also challenging AI inevitability narratives that often come with that hype. Those inevitability narratives suggest we have no choice but to rapidly adopt and embrace AI, which I should probably place in quotation marks, as we'll talk about. Or if we don't immediately adopt AI, will become relics of the past. And libraries, we don't want to be relics of the past and have often feared becoming so. So at last year's Gale conference, the three of us, along with Violet Fox, presented on a panel we called Sitting with the Cognitive Dissonance in the Term AI Literacy. There we recognize the unease that a growing number of library workers, including us, have about the continued pressures for libraries to embrace and promote Gen AI technologies, especially in teaching. And we shared ways we're navigating the disorienting terrain of AI discourse in our work. This year, we're going to be building on that conversation as we challenge what one of the presenters described as the feeling rules of generative AI discourse in academic libraries. So real briefly, feeling rules, this is a concept that sociologist Arlie Hochschild coined in the 1980s. And these are social expectations about the appropriate ways to feel and to display or perform those emotions. So today, next slide, we're going to first of all unpack what AI hype is. Then we'll talk about how to understand AI as an ideology and why some are challenging that ideology. That includes us. Finally, we're going to share some concrete examples from our own individual and collective work in challenging AI hype and AI inevitability narratives over the past year. And how through those experiences, we grow a sense of both individual and collective agency to respond in this moment. And that collective agency is really important because this is a very complex issue. So from the outset, we also want to acknowledge the conversations about AI in libraries. They can feel polarizing, as we saw in some of the chat during the keynote. It can appear as if there's simply two self-enclosed camps of either AI boosterism or AI doomerism. But the perception of these extremes actually feeds AI hype. It encourages either or in us-them thinking, and it oversimplifies the conversation. It distracts from the need to examine the larger structures, systems, and social conditions in which AI technologies and library work are embedded. So we want to be thinking about that today. And this kind of distraction can keep people siloed and isolated at a time when we most need critical dialogue, grounded in shared values and honest reflection on the conditions of our everyday work and of our communities. While the precarity that workers in fields like librarianship and education are facing has perhaps helped to drive messages that we must either fully embrace AI technologies or become obsolete, that same precarity, when named, can become a ground for opening critical dialogue and building community around shared concerns and values, which is something we're hoping to do today. Next slide. So we're going to begin by unpacking what hype is so that we can more readily identify it and gain some critical distance through which to make better sense of discourse about AI and its potential implications for our work as library workers and as educators. It's important to recognize that the term AI is a marketing tool. It was very deliberately chosen to attract grant funding, and it's used in different ways by different people, so it doesn't have any fixed, clear meaning. So when we talk about AI, we're also a lot of times thinking about hype. Next slide. So I'm going to first of all unpack what hype is. And there we go. So this is coming from Dodds et al., an article on AI and journalism. They describe AI hype as, quote, a set of exaggerated promises anticipatory narratives, and/or inflated expectations that are strategically produced and circulated by institutions, experts, media organizations, or individual actors, and which function not merely as discourse, but as a structuring force that shapes decisions, redistributes resources, legitimizes actors, and configures socio-technical futures before those futures materially exist. I know that's a lot, so we're going to unpack some different pieces of that. Next slide, please. So hype can be alluring. This is a great resource, Hype Literacy Toolkit for Journalists, that I think is a must read for anyone. And they talk about hype being characterized by, quote, the fascination with the future. Exaggerated and unrealistic promises of value development are coupled with a strident optimism that captures the attention of investors, technologists, politicians, journalists, and the general citizenry. Next slide. And hype is a shaper of imagined possibilities and futures. So when we talk about inevitability narratives, when we are told something is inevitable, it kind of locks in the conditions to make it inevitable when it actually doesn't have to be. So Galanis et al., they kind of introduced this new field of critical hype studies. This is a great paper, I think, for understanding hype. They say, quote, hype shapes what futures are thinkable, fundable, and desirable, while simultaneously narrowing the space for alternative imaginaries. Hype is as much about exclusion and silencing as it is about amplification and spectacle. Next slide. And hype is a tool of power. As Galanis et al. Continue, they say that we need to understand hype in this way. Quote, the agents driving hype may have shifted over time, but vulnerable groups such as workers or the environment remain at risk, often seeing their rights and protections eroded under the narrative of imminent progress. And I know we're not getting into all of the ethical issues around, AI in quotation marks right now. So happy to talk more with people about those things. But when we think about hype again, like who is speaking, who is considered to be an expert, and who is not being included in the conversation, how are voices, perhaps being pushed out of the conversation. Okay, next slide. And then we can also think about hype in terms of what it does. So this is, again, coming from the Hype Literacy Toolkit. They outline 14 things that hype can do. So I've got 2 slides on this. These are direct quotes. Makes uncertain things look certain, speeds everything up, bends the facts, plays with emotions, sells stories, not reality, moves money and resources, aligns people around the same story. Next slide. Silences critique, locks people into early commitments, lets private companies set the rules, concentrates power, skews political agendas, fuels booms and busts, and helps to make the future it sells. All right, next slide. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Sarah to talk about AI as an ideology, because when we're thinking about hype, we also need to think about the kind of assumptions and beliefs that are underlying how people talk about AI. Again, remembering that AI means many things. It is actually not specific to any particular technology.
Thanks, Andrea. Yes, I'm going to talk about how hype is not just selling us tools, it's selling us particular worldviews, perspectives, belief systems, and possible futures. And importantly, we're going to talk about AI refusal and what we're actually refusing when we say that we're participating in a practice of refusal. So next slide. So ideology, we need to understand what is ideology in order to really situate what it is we are imploring us as a field to participate in refusal around. So ideology, I'm sure, is a tool, a term that you guys have all heard of before. It is a system of both conscious and unconscious beliefs shared by people that shapes how they interpret the world and how they think the world should be. And this should word is important here because should implies that there is an ethical perspective embedded in our ideologies, right? They tell us how we should speak, how we should behave, what we consider to be ethically right and wrong. And the important thing about ideology is that we interact with it every day. There are different levels, whether that's the macro social level, like you see in my diagram on the screen here. This is a stock image. I didn't make it and I did not generate it. We also have, institutional ideologies as well as, of course, our own personal ideologies. And the trick about ideology is that the way we take agency over it is becoming aware of it. Until we know what ideologies we're embedded in, how they're shaping the way we see the world and our practices, we cannot reflexively and critically engage with them. And so becoming aware of what ideologies underpin AI systems and their development is a really important step in engaging in a practice of refusal. Next slide. So there are also many misconceptions, both in our field and more broadly, about what refusal is that I think are really important to clarify right off the bat. And I wanted to start with this quote from Audre Lorde because I really think it sets the stage for what we're talking about today. And she writes, "To refuse to participate in the shaping of our future is to give it up. Do not be misled into passivity, either by false security, they don't mean me, or by despair, there's nothing we can do," as that graduation speaker wanted us to believe. Each of us must find our work and do it. So what is refusal not? Well, it is not a motivated ignorance that allows individuals in close proximity to power to avoid reflecting on our own privileges at the expense of those that are harmed by oppressive systems. Refusal is also not disengagement or avoidance from the conversation around AI, especially when it is directly impacting our communities. Refusal is also not a delegation of the responsibility for intervening in AI harms to only those who are perceived as directly impacted, whether those are fellow librarians or others. Refusal is also, importantly, not declining to use our expertise and experience to become leaders in the local and global AI-related decision-making. And finally, refusal is not staying in our comfort zone and avoiding difficult conversations. So now that we've got that cleared up, let's talk about what refusal is. Next slide, please. So defining refusal, you can move forward, Emily. So refusal is a term that is not, we're not using it in its colloquial sense, right? We're not just talking about like, I refuse to do that because I don't feel like it. Refusal is a theoretically ground orientation to state power that was theorized by an Indigenous scholar named Audra Simpson. And this was really to, again, theorize the relationship between Indigenous people and the state and the ways that the state is misaligned with Indigenous worldviews. And so refusal is a rejection of particular colonial ways of seeing, being in, and interacting with the world. Refusal is also a generative stance, not just a no that moves us towards new analytical practices. Refusal invites a consideration of what can be produced and facilitated otherwise. And shout out to Kay Slater, who I think is in here today, for giving us this sentence. Refusal is an option for producing and maintaining alternative structures of thought, returning back to Simpson, politics and traditions away and in critical relationship to states. Refusals also illuminate limits and possibilities and are often part of political action, movements for decolonization, and involve a rejection of specific structures and systems. And finally, refusal invites an intersectional interrogation of power and the ways we each may be both complicit and subjected to it. So refusal is not disengagement. It is not declining to participate. It is not avoiding the conversation. It is active, generative, and rooted in the refusal of the ideologies that are sustaining not only these technologies, but the economics and the politics and the labor systems that support them. Next slide, please. So refusal involves a lot of things, and I'm just going to very quickly go through some of them because this is just scratching the surface. But like Andrea hinted at, refusal involves moving past overly simplistic definitions of AI as a singular technology. AI is not one technology. It is many, many technologies that have been strategically grouped under this umbrella term of AI for a lot of reasons, right? I'll talk about the marketing reasons in just a moment. Calling something AI is more likely to get it funded, right? Even if the technology underneath it maybe looks something like AI, but isn't necessarily achieving the level of sophistication we often think about. We often also are sold this idea of AI as something close to human intelligence, and people are trying to make that in the form of strong AI or artificial general intelligence. But the fact of the matter is we are nowhere near, not anywhere close to technologies that can come anywhere akin to the human brain and our cognitive capacities. Of course, they can supplement it. You might hear the term neural networks, which implies that AI is like our brain. But whereas our brain has like trillions of connections, these neural networks have only achieved billions. So we are nowhere near anything akin to artificial intelligence. And so calling it that is really a misnomer. Next slide, please. So related to this, Bender and Hannah in their book, The AI Con, recommend that instead of talking about AI, which they see again as a marketing term, it is a term used to get capital and funding. You may have heard of the AI bubble. That's a result of this marketing to sell tools without the technical functionings to actually back up their claims. So instead, they recommend we speak of automation, because this gives us the ability to speak more precisely about what and who is being automated and why, right? What are the values informing that inclination towards automation? Is it profit or is it the social good? Most of the time, if you're talking to a sales representative, it's going to be profit. But of course, from a librarian's perspective, our motivation is always the social good. And I think that looking at categories like what we have on the screen here are helpful because it allows us to have a more specific conversation. There's a difference between having a really abstract conversation about like, how is AI going to affect metadata and cataloging? That's a really abstract conversation. There's no answer to that question. But we can ask specific questions like, how does AI-enabled classification systems help or hinder our pursuit of human-centered and critical cataloging? That's a material question that we can start investigating, and we can understand the different value systems behind those different perspectives. Next slide, please. So very quickly, when we are able to understand these not just one tool, but an umbrella of tools, we can also look past seeing these artifacts as simply that, just a tool, to a socio-technical system that acknowledges that the tool is not what we make of it, that it is given to us with a certain set of values already embedded in it, whether that's from the technical environment, the social environment, being, you know, the economics, the policies, the history, the rhetorics that are around that technology, and then, of course, the natural environment, which people are really starting to get concerned about. Next slide. And once we've reframed these from tools to socio-technical systems, we can then start asking ourselves these questions about AI ideology, right? And so there isn't enough time in this session to define every way that AI ideologies have been conceptualized, but there is a lot out there that we can start looking at to familiarize ourselves with this idea. And so just a sampling of examples, AI Hype and the AI Con by Bender and Hannah is one approach to conceptualizing this. We also have the book Empire of AI by Karen Howe, where she talks about the big tech playbook, the steps they take to embed themselves in communities and the false promises they often make. The Californian ideology, which talks about the neoliberal values underpinning Silicon Valley. And this has been a concept that's been around for 30 years, which also reminds us that this conversation is old. It's not new. It's just we are recognizing it. There's a scale that perhaps we've never seen before. My advisor, Jasmina Tacheva, has conceptualized this as AI empire, where AI is rooted in the ideologies of capitalism, heteropatriarchy, white supremacy, and so on. And then finally, I'm sure many of you have experienced Gebru and Torres's landmark paper on the text reel bundle, where they map the history of AI development to the ideologies underpinning both historical and modern day eugenics movements. So next slide, please. So what do we do once we understand that AI ideology is a thing? Well, we need to learn how to recognize them, how to become conscious about them, and then enact our agency over them, right? Be able to understand how these ideologies are shaping our beliefs, our practices, and then make the decision to either continue to align ourselves with those ideologies or do something different. So step one is just to read, right? To read as much as possible, whether those are the scholarly books and papers I just posted, whether those are podcasts, whether it is TED Talks, TikToks, YouTube videos, whatever you need to consume to learn more and more about this. That is one of the most important things we can do to enact our agency. And then after that, we already are practicing the media and literacy skills we need to investigate these things, right? We are experts in questioning authority and content and history. So really a lot of this comes down to using the skills we already have as librarians, but making sure we have the language and the vocabulary, again, to raise awareness around not only these tools and their technical limitations, but the value systems that underpin them. That was a lot. Hopefully that was useful. I'm now going to turn things over to Emily to bring us home with some experiences.
Yeah, thank you all. So Andrea and Sarah have given me a great setup for some of the things that I've been doing lately. And if you see me looking over at the screen, I have two screens. So I'm trying to look at y'all in my little camera here. Okay. So on this slide, I know there's a lot on this slide, but I'll go through it. All of these quotes are from vendor marketing emails that have come into my inbox. I have made a habit of saving them and forwarding them to my research partner, Sarah, so that we can do a discourse analysis on the hype and inevitability language that they so often use and that we set up for you at the beginning of this presentation. So the first three are from advertisements for EBSCOhost's AI Exchange, which would, to my understanding, function similarly to Google Scholar's library links, except the library would be directly connected to whatever AI platform the university had a license to. So it would be on that AI platform. Some of this messaging gets at a lot of the anxiety that we have been feeling in libraries, I think. So that fear of being left behind, the fear that our patrons are not getting what they need, and that push to measure and prove everything with data, especially with that third one. Power campus AI initiatives with citations, attribution, and measurable usage tied back to your library. The last two are from a Choice Webinars email, which is Clarivate. They have really leaned into the inevitability narrative, as we talked about earlier, especially in the second one. The question is whether your library has a seat at the table. It is particularly interesting to me, given our talk about agency and refusal thus far. It's always worth asking which table and to whose benefit. Right now, I have about 17 pages of email language like this from vendors. Yeah, thanks, Tess. I wore this hat very specifically. You probably also noticed on this slide that I have some marketing materials here from the company Baer, which is geared toward school libraries. Their parent company is OSIS. There was a bit of an uproar about this marketing and the fact that they were part of ALA Annual's vendor marketplace. Initially, their marketing made it seem as though their goal was to bypass the librarian entirely. So, quote, Baer ILS is powerful for professionals, simple enough for anyone, and intelligent enough to not need a trained librarian. Their marketing has since been changed to our elegant catalog and patron management system is simple to use but powerful. We save time for skilled librarians and empower them to do what they do best. It's worth noting that Baer is a startup and is trying to enter that vendor space of libraries. Vendors that have been in the game for a while use messaging surrounding AI that keeps AI in the picture, maybe makes us anxious, makes us fear being obsolete. But Baer perhaps said the quiet thing out loud here, eventually automating people out of that work. So at this point, I want to ask folks, what vendor messaging have you encountered? Please feel free to put it in the chat. We're not going to grab the chat or anything. I've seen some talk about like data set maybe making this a data set in the chat. Everything in chat I'm not grabbing, so please just feel free to keep typing, and I'll keep going. So how do we practice agency with vendors? This is one thing, my experience so far. Librarians are often beholden to technology vendors that run things like our catalog, databases, and other software we use on a daily basis. So exercising your agency or refusing AI ideology often looks like being willing to ask the hard questions. Why or to what ends will always be relevant. And we should be asking this about any technology, not just generative AI. So why are we trying to be more efficient? Are we trying to just do the work of 4 people with the same salary? Is this actually the appropriate tool for the task? And is it actually worth the cost of adding, whether that's a license or a new vendor tool? Ask vendors how costs will change over time. This is becoming more and more relevant because this just happened with GitHub and Claude, where a token system was added. People who had come to depend on it very quickly used up all their tokens, and racked up quite a bill for their AI use as they had used it previously. It's also worth asking who the users surveyed are. So was it just at an R1 university? What were those students' majors? Have they even done user testing? Sometimes things are moving so fast that they haven't. Finally, as librarians, we should always be asking about policies related to our users and their privacy. And that does include us if it's a tool that's directed at librarians in our workflow as well. So it's already been mentioned in the chat, but I do have to plug Library Freedom Project here. And they have some resources with critical AI talking points that go beyond my slide here. So please check them out. And that is also where I got the hat. Okay, so here are some examples, some specific examples. I'm in a couple spaces regarding generative AI. The first space I wanted to talk about is the Clarivate Academic AI Working Group. They put out a call for volunteers a few months ago, and I applied with my CV and a short email about why I wanted to join. I emphasized that I am a relatively early career librarian, and I did not hide my critical AI work. I was invited to be on it with librarians from around the world, hence sometimes having an 8 a.m. meeting for it. And being in that space has been interesting. My philosophy in this space is to be a problem. And I don't say that I'm not trying to cause a hard time just for the sake of it, but asking those hard questions again and trying to push the thinking further. ACRL log or ACRL's blog has been a key player in this. And while more traditional scholarship is super important, obviously journal articles are big, other places of public scholarship can be equally so. So the post, "We couldn't generate an answer for your question" by Jay Singley brought negative attention to Ex Libris's research assistant, which is AI powered. The issues laid out in this post have been fixed according to Clarivate, and they detailed the adjustments in the post linked here. It will also be in our references. At the end of the post, they said that they were creating the academic AI working group that I am now a part of. So that post started a conversation, and it has led to many more conversations. As a regular ACRL log writer, I sometimes feel like I'm writing into the void. But it's important to remember that we aren't always in the rooms to see the impact that we might be making. Additionally, I co-wrote a post with some of my coworkers in tech services and acquisitions on the proliferation of AI slop in book buying. This has led to a presentation at the Maryland Library Conference, which had to be moved to the biggest room in the hotel to accommodate the attendance. And we have also been invited to do a webinar with ACRL, so keep an eye out for that. Because of that post, I've had conversations with academic and public librarians alike about what AI policy might look like in collection development. Finally, I wanted to mention that I have joined both Salisbury University task forces, as well as a group that brings together faculty from 3 different Maryland universities. So in these rooms, I'm asking some of the questions that were on my previous slide, or simply pointing out that we cannot call ourselves a green campus that cares about sustainability if we are also embracing uncritical AI use. In both of these spaces, I have been approached by someone who's also in the group, but didn't quite feel comfortable enough to speak about their criticality towards AI. One thing I've learned in the past few years is that we are out there and we will find each other. As you can see, my practice of agency and refusal of AI ideology involves quite a bit of engagement. And I'll be totally honest, sometimes I'm very resentful that so much of my scholarship and service has focused on Gen AI. There is so much else I would rather talk about. But when a local public librarian messaged me on Facebook to talk about what to do about an AI-generated book that she had in her collection, I get the sense that being so visibly critical about Gen AI gives others their launching off point. And so I will continue to do so. And I'll throw it back to Andrea.
Thanks, Emily. So I'm just going to jump in there with a few reflective practices and some reflective questions that might help in, because it can be really hard to enter into honest conversations about AI when there is so much hype, when it's hard to even know what we're talking about when we talk about AI. And so these can be kind of starting points for thinking both individually and collectively about what AI is, and then how we want to engage in conversations. So one is just recognizing that AI is a marketing term, and that AI hype is a tool of power, and understanding how hype functions. We talked a little bit about that, but we've given you some resources that go into much more depth. Using more precise language in discussions of specific digital technologies. Creating spaces and language for investigating and naming our experiences. That includes our affective experiences that often, don't get the same kind of attention, but when it comes to hype is affective. So we really need to be paying attention to, our emotional responses as well, and investigating our cognitive and our affective response in professional discourse on AI as well. Next slide. And then I've got another slide on reflective practices, paying attention to strong feelings, whether they be individual or shared, including enthusiasm, unease, confusion, or cognitive dissonance, considering the larger contexts and conditions that influence both our discourse and our experiences. That includes labor conditions, including precarity that lots of people are feeling, power dynamics, professional and personal values, including library values, and then slowing down, taking a break, questioning messages of urgency. As Emily said, there's a lot of other things going on in the world that, deserve time and attention, and that are not getting as much attention because of so much going towards conversations about AI. Next slide. I got just a couple reflective questions to consider. What do or might these practices look like in our everyday individual and collective practices, or in public services work like teaching? I say that because of kind of where, our focus has been on teaching, but there are certainly many other areas of librarianship where we need to think about it in relation to other work that's more behind the scenes. And then how might these practices influence the kinds of futures we imagine for our profession and for the communities we serve? Again, remembering that, AI writ large, it is not all inevitable, even when we are told that it is. And I think I'm going to turn it over to Sarah now.
Yes, I am going to wrap things up, and I think we'll have a little bit of time for discussion. So our final meditations, if there's anything you leave this with except a long reading list, which if you're tired of AI, take your time, slowly work your way through it. And if this has got you riled up, then, go nuts. But there's two things we want you to leave with. Well, maybe three. And the first is this idea of planting seeds, this idea that we might do things that feel small and feel insignificant and never know when we are going to reap the benefits of what we sowed, right? In the case of Emily's blog post, she could have never have imagined necessarily that it was going to have the impacts that it has, lead to the relationships that it has. And, we often, especially in an AI generated world that is predicated on statistics and predictability, the universe is in many ways unpredictable and we don't know how things are going to unfold. So just speaking up, just showing up, just being there, just doing the thing that you can do and your tiny little ability to control is making a difference, even if you can't measure that difference immediately. And related to that, this idea of building tables has come up recently. You know, these vendors are telling us that we need to make sure that we have a seat at their table. But what if we were the ones building our own tables around the values that we center as librarians, around the public good, around democracy, around truth and access? We don't have to wait for a seat at their table, even though we should still try to get there. We can also build our own tables and do our own work, which of course we've already been doing this whole time. And then finally, ask hard questions and refuse easy answers. That's really what we're trained to do as librarians. We're trained to be curious, inquisitive. We're trained not just to accept the first result on the Google search. We're trained to look a little bit deeper. So just keep doing what you're already doing. And as you can, just keep learning about these nuances because you really have what you need to participate in this refusal. It's really just about finding your lane and finding your space. So I think that's about it. Yes, we have many references and resources that we've dropped in the chat. I think all of us are happy to receive emails from you, and our slides maybe will be posted later. We'll talk about it. But yeah, if anyone has any questions, we would love, or just things they need to get off their chest, we would love to hear from you.
Thank you all so much. That was wonderful. We have one question in the Q&A box. Ashley asks, does your AI refusal affect your job duties and expectations? Many of us are required to interact with it to be able to serve faculty, staff, and students.
I'll definitely let Emily handle this one, but I will say first that refusal is not disengagement, right? So being asked to interact with it doesn't mean you can't engage in a practice of refusal. It's how you interact with it. So I will let Emily take that on.
And I just want to jump in real quick and say, you might have noticed we actually drew from Library Freedom Project. They talk about refusing AI ideology. So when you refuse that ideology that Sarah unpacked, that is a little different from just saying like, no, I won't touch this stuff, right? Which we know is not feasible for many people. And like, it's not really feasible for anyone when we talk about like with about everything that AI is, right? So like, if you can think about, again, framing the refusal around rejecting an ideology and the values that are kind of embedded in that ideology that Sarah talked about. So yeah, let's let Emily respond.
Yeah, so I have faculty members who are asking me to do information and literacy sessions that focus around generative AI. So I have to grapple with that a little bit because personally, I'm not going to use AI for anything. However, I know I try to come at these knowing that my students are in all different places regarding technology, regarding generative AI, regarding research. So I approach those sessions very much as like, here's basics, here's why AI is kind of a marketing term in a lot of ways. Like, can we be more specific about what we are using or what we might not use? And then we have a frank conversation about it. My goal for any of those sessions that I do is that students feel comfortable enough to come and ask me questions afterwards. My place in that space is not to shame for using or not using. It is to open up that learning for them. And I've also made like more asynchronous tutorials. So I'm not actually like face to face with the students with a tutorial about generative AI. University of Maryland, I believe, I'd have to check. They have a really good information literacy and Gen AI tutorial that I pulled from for my education doctoral students, just to give them the basics and help them practice going or like practice checking citations to make sure they're real or analyzing AI generated text that I show them is AI generated. Another thing I also really focus on is in those sessions, we use my account with ChatGPT, and we talk about the terms and conditions that they may be agreeing to when they create them, to try and get them to think about their own privacy and their own data in that way. But I am on the tenure track and not tenured yet. So that is something that I think about sometimes. Like, am I making this harder for myself? I don't know. Thank you for that question.
All right, we've got another question here. How do you interact with faculty or students who genuinely believe that generative AI use will be necessary in their workplace? I'm also curious how much of that you think is hype and how much you think is real.
I know we don't have very much time, but I do want to clarify, like some people the term refusal won't resonate, and that's okay. Like, maybe there's other terms you want to use to just think like refusing uncritical adoption, or, thinking more critically. And, many people talk about AI refusal, and I would say this as well, that it doesn't mean that you're imposing your own choices onto others. Like, I do not tell students, you should never use AI, right? I know that's not realistic. So we're not saying, this is not the idea. Like, again, we want to get away from this either or kind of thinking. We want to get away, like, this is not about dogmatism, right? This is not about saying, oh, like, never use these tools, or like, you're a bad person, or you're destroying the environment, right? Like, these are very complex issues. So, I think keeping that in mind, like, if we want to encourage people to just think more critically about these, like, recognize, like, what AI, in quotation marks, what is AI, and what specific tools are we actually talking about? Like, what are their capacities, limitations, existing harms, examining these things, right? And then letting people make choices for themselves while they have better information. That's not just marketing that's coming from vendors.
Yeah, and that idea of making better choices is part of this, right? Because AI hype and inevitability narratives try to tell us that there is no choice. There is one choice: adopt or perish. Be a part of this technological empire, or be left behind and forgotten about. And the fact of the matter is, there are more options, right? There's a whole slew of options in between. And when we think about agency-centered response, that's what I do with my students. Like Andrea said, I can't say never use AI. If you do it, you're bad people. That is not only unfair and ungenerous and unempathetic, but unrealistic. We don't choose to interact with AI most of the time, right? If you just go out into a public space, you're interacting with AI, whether you want to or not, and that's a whole other problem. But having my students have the ability to think through when, how, why they're using it, rather than just defaulting on it, is for me like an important first step. And then having that conversation about, okay, they're going to use it in their jobs. How? Why? For what? Is this the only skill they need? What foundational skills do they need to show that they can use it adequately? Those are the types of questions, getting at that foundational, like, what is this for? Why? For what? For whom? Especially those basic 5W questions can get us a really long way when it comes to refusal.
Right, excellent. Well, we are out of time, but I want everyone to join me in thanking Andrea, Sarah, and Emily for a really, really interesting, thought-provoking talk. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.